Joining us now is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. He's a member of the Banking and Budget Committees as well as the Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator, first of all, is it conceivable, and we talked about this with Senator Daines yesterday, that Biden might be on board with this compromise from Republicans, but his staff could overrule him?
Well, I think it looks increasingly like that, David. Every conversation that happens between Republicans and the Biden administration go very well when Joe Biden's in the room and break down when he's not. And so it does appear that there's a little bit of an intellectual gap between the president and the people that work for him. But that's not uncommon in politics necessarily. But the buck does have to stop at the top.
Well, but in specifically concerning this president and questions about whether he is being pushed in one direction, far to the left, far further to the left than he said he would govern as he was campaigning for president. Who is in control? Is it the president? Does the president have the last word, or is it his staff?
Well, obviously the president always has the last word, even if it is his staff, because it still stops with him. So I know, David, this frustrates you when I won't answer for him, but the reality is it increasingly looks like he's got a host of people around him that disagree with him, and unfortunately they have an awful lot of sway, either with him or beyond him.
You know, it's such a dramatic change from the previous administration where it was never any question who was in charge and who was making the first and the final decision. There were people could have input in between those two, but in the end, it was all Donald Trump. In the end here, it doesn't seem to be all Joe Biden.
No, and the reality is that Joe Biden has a decades-old reputation for being a deal maker, for being a pragmatic liberal. But he doesn't have a reputation for being a moderate. And the problem now is he has all the levers of power with a 50-50 Senate and Kamala Harris, a slight majority in the House, and then, of course, the presidency. When you have all those levers, you don't need to compromise quite as much as you used to. And so I do worry a little bit about when will Joe Biden stand up to his staff, or will he yield to his staff and just jam this thing down our throats? But that's why we have to remain in the fight. And we also have to remain talking to folks like you so that the public is hearing what's going on. It's really important. When you start talking about we went to $1 trillion without spending any new money, I would hope most people watching this are going, wow, that seems like a lot of money. Maybe the president should
One would hope so, but I got to tell you, Senator, a lot of people, these numbers, these trillion-dollar plans have been coming so quickly that people are becoming inured to the power of $1 trillion. But that's not true for everybody. There are a lot of people, even some Democrats like Larry Summers and Steve Ratner, who worked for previous Democrat administrations, who say this is a real problem. This president, his budget is coming out tomorrow. He's going to essentially talk about a 40 to 50% increase in the budget. I mean, we had $1 trillion spending on COVID relief during Donald Trump, but it was temporary. It was an emergency measure. He's talking about a baseline that is about 40% greater than the baseline now. That's a huge jump.
Yeah, so we're hearing about a $6 trillion budget being presented by the president. So here's the issue. What would motivate him, I would think, would be the prospect of hyperinflation. The fact that the first $2 trillion that he jammed down our throats have created a move toward inflation, an increase in commodity prices. I can't imagine why any president under his watch would, on purpose, try to stoke the flames of inflation even greater, because that'll lead, no doubt, to increased interest rates. They'll have to, and then he wants to increase taxes at the same time. I can't think of a worse economic nightmare.
Well, the Fed, of course, he's relying on the Fed not to increase rates, so they would continue to just print money in order to buy up the debt that exists to keep rates low. But the bottom line is that leads to inflation, and Americans are seeing it right now. Every time they fill up at the pump, every time they buy groceries, they're seeing it right now. Is it going to become a political issue?
I think it is becoming a political issue, and for those people who want to live in the bubble in the White House and pretend that somehow the American public isn't going to notice, they need to get out more, because we're hearing it all the time, especially people that are building new homes or they're trying to buy a new home. I have a daughter and her husband who built a new home, moved into it, and the day they moved in, 2 people knocked on their door and asked if they could buy it because the price of building has gone up so fast and so much. So this is real life consequences, and they ought to start paying attention.
Well, the president says that it's all fine, and in fact, the debt is actually going to come down over the next few years because the extra money that they're going to get in taxes is going to lead to that. Now, what he doesn't say is that 1%, the top 1%, the rich people who he thinks are going to pay for all this, are already paying 40% of all the income tax revenue. 40% is coming from the top 1%. And I should mention that that increase, the percent that the top 1% is paying in income tax, increased after the Trump tax cuts. That is, they got more involved in the economy. He thinks that raising the tax rates all across the board are really going to bring in more revenue. Do you think he's right or wrong?
Well, I think he's absolutely wrong. Anytime you raise taxes, you reduce revenue. You might have a short-term spike in the income, but clearly people respond to that. Clearly investment responds to that. And there's just no way. In fact, to your point, when with the largest tax cut in American history, we created the greatest economy in recent history.
Just to be specific, by the way, let me just be specific here. 39% of all income tax was coming from the top 1% before the Trump tax cuts. Now it's over 40%. I don't know if that's current right now because things are changing by the minute. But we only have a couple of minutes. I want to switch to a subject near and dear to your heart. One of the places we're not going to get more money from in the future is fossil fuels. Despite our tremendous achievement of becoming energy independent, the Biden administration wants to cut our dependence on fossil fuels. But at the same time, he wants to let it rip in Europe with Putin's pipeline. I'm just wondering what kind of pushback. You're from a state that has done extraordinarily well by fracking. What is their reaction to the fact that we're cutting all of these jobs with the XL pipeline and fossil fuels, but opening up more jobs for the folks in Russia?
Well, it's nonsensical, and that people in North Dakota know it, and I think people across the country know it. Imagine that 2 weeks after Vladimir Putin's friends in the Russian mafia shut down an American pipeline, Joe Biden rewards him by giving the green light to his pipeline. And what's crazy about that, David, is natural gas produced in Russia and shipped via pipeline to Europe, right into the heart of NATO, by the way, has a 40% greater greenhouse gas emissions footprint than does
If you care about global warming, you should be more concerned about the Russian pipeline than XL, right?
That's exactly right. At the same time, they're negotiating with Iran about maybe lifting the sanctions on their oil exports. So they shut down our industry and build up Iran's and Russia's. They might as well just have Venezuelan oil come back and replace oil sands from Canada. It's all nonsensical. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for national security, and it's bad for the environment. Other than that, it's a swell idea.
But the point is, he's doing it unless it's conceivable that his decision on XL can be changed. It was an executive order. Can it be changed? Could it be turned back? Of course, a lot of the Canadians who are involved in building this are fed up. They're probably not going to go for it. But can you turn his decision around?
Well, I don't know if we can turn it around with votes anymore, but I will say this. Here's what the plea I'd make to him, and I made this to Secretary Granholm last week, the Energy Secretary. If you want to get well over $1 trillion in infrastructure, unleash the private sector with oil, gas, carbon monoxide or CO2 emissions infrastructure, and have transmission for electric transmission infrastructure. But you don't need to spend federal taxpayer dollars on it. Just unleash the private sector, and you'll have all the infrastructure that you can handle.
Senator, we have to go, but very quickly, supposedly we got over $1 trillion left over from a lot of the COVID relief funds. It hasn't been spent yet. Will that be reapportioned to fit this infrastructure bill?
Well, that's, of course, the Republican proposal. It makes all the sense in the world. In addition, it's an 8-year authorization, which means you provide even more certainty, which should bring the cost of infrastructure down.
You heard Jen Psaki, by the way, say that was a non-starter. Go ahead.
A non-starter. I don't know how you can have a bipartisan discussion with non-starters. Non-starters mean you don't start a discussion. No, it absolutely makes all the sense. That's exactly what we ought to do, is repurpose existing appropriations.
Senator Cramer, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. David.